It's the OceanGate Titanic experience, earning raves from those who've taken our unforgettable dives. A 12,500-foot...
A submersible vessel which takes people to see the wreck of the Titanic has gone missing in the Atlantic Ocean.
A complex search, now more complicated by time.
How likely is it that they will find this submersible in time before the oxygen runs out?
They're bolted in. They cannot open the hatch from the inside, so they need to be located, hooked, say, with a cable.
And this is a place where it's been eternally cold and pressure's building. So when you land, you're landing, as I said, almost on it's a very unfamiliar world.
We only have one button, that's it. It should be like an elevator.
And I think this idea of people trapped in a small space somewhere remote is kind of something that plays into a lot of our deepest fears.
There are search and rescue crews now combing the icy waters.
I got these from Camper World. We run the whole thing with this game controller.
These small submersibles usually take paying tourists and experts to check out the wreck of the Titanic, and they pay big bucks.
I have no idea what ability they have to pull that thing up.
Everything else can fail. Your thrusters can go, your lights can go. You're still going to be safe.
In June of 2023, we saw one of the biggest stories of the year play out. A story that took over coverage on the media for 3 to 4 days worldwide. A story that played into a deep human fear of being trapped in a small enclosed space as the oxygen dwindles away. A story that split opinion between sympathy and outrage as the outlook towards the wealthy is at an all-time low. And that story was, of course, the hunt for the missing Titan submersible, the submersible that had gone down with 5 on board to one of the deepest places in the world to look at the wreck of the Titanic.
Get ready for what Jules Verne could only imagine. A 12,500-foot journey to the bottom of the sea. It's the OceanGate Titanic experience. Earning raves from those who've taken our unforgettable dives.
The journey began on June 16th as the Polar Prince, a Canadian ship, set sail for the wreckage site of the Titanic with the Titan submersible, the crew, and the passengers all on board, looking forward to an exciting adventure.
It begins with boarding day in picturesque St. John's, Newfoundland. Mission specialists meet each other in the OceanGate team.
These small submersibles usually take paying tourists and experts to check out the wreck of the Titanic, and they pay big bucks.
Prep starts before dawn with initial safety checks, reviewing assignments and gearing up. Then comes the pre-launch briefing, followed by boarding the Titan.
So you sign up. We have to make sure that people are healthy enough and physically fit. You need to be able to climb a ladder, and it's not a huge physical requirement, but it's more important that people understand this is a real expedition. We have all kinds of challenges, not just weather, but equipment. And then once we've accepted the person into the program, they can pay to join, and then there's a lot of training that goes on. No one is just a tourist.
And the company's website does advertise 7-night voyages to see this wreckage. It's priced at about $250,000.
Inside the surface vessel is Command Central. There, OceanGate operatives and specialists not diving that day are guided by the mission director before countdown to launch.
Roger, platform ready to dive.
Mission director's go, platform launch.
On Sunday morning, June 18th, the safety checks were completed on the Titan submersible. It was moved out onto its launch platform, pushed out away from the Polar Prince, and began its dive around 8 a.m. local time. On board were 5 passengers and 96 hours of available oxygen.
The 5-person submersible started its dive around 9 a.m. Newfoundland time on Sunday.
Normally a dive, you begin on the surface in a light blue, pretty color blue that we're familiar with. It takes 2.5 hours to get to the bottom, roughly. And you start to drift down slowly through that water column. And this is a place where it's been eternally cold and pressure's building. So when you land, you're landing, as I said, almost it's a very unfamiliar world.
Yeah, so they left from the mothership. The mothership towed them out from Newfoundland. They departed from the mothership Sunday morning. They were heading for about a 2-hour transit down to the bottom of the ocean, tour around the Titanic for about 4 hours, and then go on back.
But after an hour and 45 minutes, contact was lost.
At 6:35 p.m. Newfoundland time on Sunday, the sub was reported missing when it failed to surface at the scheduled time of 6:10 p.m.
So once the expected return time of the submersible had come and gone, the OceanGate team decided it was time to put out a full alert to the Coast Guard, and a monumental search began looking for the submersible, a needle in a haystack that would be watched around the globe by wall-to-wall coverage on media outlets shortly after the search began.
So we mentioned this about 15 minutes ago. There is a frantic matter now unfolding in the Atlantic Ocean.
A race to save 5 people who are on board a submersible.
Right now, U.S. Coast Guard officials are racing to find a submersible operated by a company that runs tours of the Titanic wreckage.
Off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador, in the Labrador Sea in Canada.
Well, ships and planes are scouring the ocean around 640 kilometres off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. The search area is as large as the U.S. state of Connecticut.
And the only thing that we can say is that everything that can be done is being done, and that includes the Coast Guard at the surface, listening a bit beneath the surface, and then assembling right now are some of the best robotic people.
Communication through water is always very difficult. So once you've lost communication, it's very difficult to locate where it is. One of the big problems with the research is that they don't know whether to look on the surface of the Atlantic or on the seabed. It could be in either place.
It is a challenge to conduct a search in that remote area, but we are deploying all available assets to make sure that we can locate the craft and rescue the people on board.
Earlier, American and Canadian officials said the effort to find the sub near the wreck of the Titanic is intensifying, as the 5 people on board are believed to have just over a day's supply of oxygen left.
So right now, rescuers are really racing to find the missing dive vessel that is somewhere in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. A race against time, very clearly, as the oxygen supply on board dwindles.
But then the problem isn't over, because how are you going to get those people? They're under sea pressure, which is 300 times what it is here at the atmosphere, and we got to somehow get them out of there. So you need a claw that's going to go down 2 miles and pick them up, or you need a ship that's designed to mate with that ship. And I don't know what kind of mating connections that ship has.
Alex, a few different types of aircraft taking part in this search, each with their specific search and rescue or search and recovery role, and search the surface of the water, whether that's for debris or if the submersible surfaced and lost communications. So they're likely in charge of that role, given that this could be quite a large search area. Canada has also launched a P-8 Poseidon. Brian mentioned this is a submarine hunter, and that's what its specialty is. But to its advantage, at least this submersible wants to be found. One of the ways it will search is with what are called sonar buoys. It drops these into the water, and these listen for any sound or acoustic signature.
Assuming that there was not a catastrophic failure and they're already dead, they are extremely cold. It's 29 degrees there. The temperature, water doesn't freeze because of pressure and salinity, obviously, but they may be fighting thermal issues underwater. They may be hypothermic because of cold.
The deepest ever underwater rescue was less than 2,000 feet. So this could be an unprecedented rescue if the Coast Guard finds that sub.
There's been no communication with the sub, so even if you're lost, there's usually communications back and forth with the sub. You just don't know exactly where you are, and you hope the surface can tell you.
I don't think they really need, on the underwater portion of it, to search an area twice the size of Connecticut. It's probably probably no more than a mile or 2 miles by 2 miles on the bottom, which is most likely the place where the submersible is. Most likely it's not on the surface, or I think it would have been spotted. And it's very, very highly unlikely that it's in the water column between the bottom and surface.
The depth's it's a real problem. And the pressure down there is 400 times what we experience here. They're bolted in. They cannot open the hatch from the inside. So they need to be located, hooked, say with a cable, brought back up, and then we can let them out.
So we have 2 vessels, remote operated vehicles that are conducting subsurface search, and we have aircraft and surface vessels that are conducting the surface search at this time, Matthew.
And you've been on one of these missions, flying over
With
vast
the New Zealand
areas
Air
of ocean.
Force, the New Zealand Air Force we were based out of Perth, and I joined them for the search of MH370. And it's remarkable to be up there and to see looking for a needle in a haystack from way above. It's amazing.
The search area now that they've conducted so far, if you can imagine this, Kate, they now say is 10,000 square miles, a massive area, a remote area.
Now, one of the most challenging parts of this search operation is the depth, of course. The world record for scuba diving is only to a depth of about 1,000 feet. Once you hit 3,200 feet, light is no longer visible. 2,000 feet further, at 5,200 feet, most animals can't survive. Now, sperm whales can dive deeper than any other mammal. They can only get down to 10,000 feet. 12,000 feet is about the average depth of the ocean floor. The Titanic is still below that. The wreckage settled at 12,450 feet, which is 2.4 miles below the surface.
As the search continued and the oxygen clock quickly ran down, we finally got confirmation of the 5 passengers aboard the Titan submersible.
It would be a good idea for us to remember right now the names of the missing, the people that we've been following, because these are real people. And to begin with is a Pakistani businessman. His name is Shahzada Dawood, and his son, 19-year-old Suleiman Dawood, a university student studying in Scotland. Hamish Harding, he's a very, very wealthy British businessman. And he's the one who said, I recognize going down to the Mariana Trench that if something happens, I may not be coming back. Stockton Rush is the company's CEO, OceanGate CEO, and the founder and the pilot. There is an unbelievable story with Mr. Rush. According to both the New York Times and the Washington Post, his wife is the descendant of 2 people who died on the Titanic. In fact, they were among the wealthiest people to die on the Titanic. And now, according to the Times and the Wash Post, his wife may end up losing her husband at the Titanic. Just an unbelievable series of events. And then finally, the Frenchman who is a pilot, a sub-expert, is Paul-Henri Nargeolet. He is known as one of the best.
Maybe best of all are the one-on-ones with experts like Commander Paul-Henri Nargeolet, leader of 30 dives to the Titanic wreck site. He and other world-class experts will be on all our missions to give you an unrivaled, up-close and personal OceanGate Titanic experience.
So he has lots of experience with submarine. He knows how to react if there is a problem. And so I'm very confident about it, that he can manage good the situation. And he's really passionate about the Titanic since they found it more than 30 years ago. And I know now he's at the place he would like to be. Just I really hope they will find them all safe. I think we have to trust what they're doing and to be confident.
The news is that PH is with them. PH Nargeolet is one of the members of the team, and you couldn't have a better person with you in a situation like this than PH, who's made 35 dives to the Titanic, who is calm under pressure. The best kind of leadership will be coming from PH. He will be calm, quiet, and doing all the right things to conserve energy, to conserve oxygen, and to conserve psychological, emotional energy as well.
As the search widened and the coverage intensified, questions began to be asked about the safety of this submersible. Should it have been cleared to go on this dive at all in the first place? And its development began to be questioned by the media, with more and more details piling out by the hour. But with the founder of the company actually on board the submersible, were these valid concerns at all?
OceanGate's mission is to expand humanity's understanding of the ocean through exploration, research, and responsible commercialization. It's almost impossible to describe what it's like to be underwater, which is why I wanted to launch OceanGate. The reason that it's critical that people go underwater and explore the ocean in person in a submarine versus a robot is that it establishes an emotional context and a awareness that is personal. And then there is the adventure tourist. These are individuals who want a different travel experience, who might want to come with us to see the Titanic or hydrothermal vents or tons of wrecks yet to be discovered.
We're excited about doing it in a way that is safe and enjoyable and engage other people in that activity.
This is not tourism, you're contributing. It's not a ride at Disney, you know. There's a lot of real risk involved and there's a lot of challenges.
We partnered with aerospace experts at the University of Washington, NASA, and Boeing on the design of our hull. OceanGate owns 3 submersibles. We have Antipodes, which can go to 305 meters or 1,000 feet, Cyclops 1, which goes to 500 meters or 1,600 feet, and Titan, which goes to 4,000 meters or 13,200 feet. All our submersibles can carry 5 people. That is typically a pilot, a researcher, and then 3 mission specialists. It's very unique. Most other submersibles, even the shallow diving submersibles, are 3-person submersibles. You have huge viewports, and in Titan we have the largest viewport on any deep diving sub. And we also have a number of high definition cameras and 4K cameras. So you have displays and images, and you can see out as far as the light will go, depending on what the visibility is.
It's very well engineered and very safe, and the team is very focused on safety first.
Even after a successful dive, there is much to be done. A key element is the debrief session led by the mission director and subsea pilot. Simultaneously, the OceanGate tech team does an extensive safety check for the next dive.
The most difficult and expensive aspect of submersible operations is the launch and recovery of the vehicle. And we launch the sub on the platform that is towed behind the mothership. And then the submersible command module leaves the platform, does its mission, comes back to the submersible, mates underwater to the platform, and then is brought to the surface. We only have one button, that's it. It should be like an elevator. You know, it shouldn't take a lot of skill.
I couldn't help noticing how many pieces of this sub seemed improvised.
I got these from Camper World. We run the whole thing with this game controller.
Come on! There's no GPS underwater, so the surface ship is supposed to guide the sub to the shipwreck by sending text messages.
Turn 30 degrees right?
Probably 30 degrees. But on this dive, communications somehow broke down. The sub never found the wreck.
We were lost. We were lost for 2.5 hours.
It seems like this submersible has some elements of MacGyver-y jerry-riggedness. I mean, you're putting construction pipes as ballast.
I don't know if I'd use that description of it. The pressure vessel is not MacGyver at all. Everything else can fail. Your thrusters can go, your lights can go, you're still going to be safe.
I think there's an element here of what was called the reality distortion field with Steve Jobs and especially now with Elon Musk, where these entrepreneurs get so singularly focused on their project that they somewhat ignore the downsides, and they're willing to bend all rules, including ones that can't be bent, like the laws of physics, in order to try and get their project to work. They believe so much in their capabilities as well as the project's importance as a whole that they're willing to take any level of risk to get the job done. And if you watch footage of Stockton around the vessel with passengers and just talking about the ship, he clearly does have a firm belief in this. And I do think there is an element of sincerity and an element of a firm belief that the way they're developing this ship is cutting edge. And I think it is that mind-bending distortion field that some of these people have that allow them to overlook things that the rest of us would see as massive red flags.
Joining us right now is James Cameron, diver, explorer, director of The Abyss, a deep-sea thriller, and most famously, of course, Titanic as well.
Well, I always say you'd have to take a backhoe with you to go deeper than I went anywhere on this planet. That is a feeling of remoteness. I knew when I made that dive that there was no hope of rescue. There literally was no vehicle in the world, no matter if you could fly it in, no matter if I could survive long enough on my life support system. There was no rescue.
Would you ever have taken passengers on board a submersible that had not gone through the standard maritime safety protocols?
You know, carbon fiber composites are used very, very successfully for internal pressure vessels, like let's say a scuba tank. And you can get 2 or 3 times multiple of what you could get out of steel or aluminum for that type of pressure bottle. But for something that's seeing external pressure, all of the advantages of composite materials go away and all the disadvantages come into play. The second you start doing carbon composite or any kind of composite materials, you're introducing 2 materials that are in contact with each other. The filament itself and then the epoxy matrix that it sits within. And at that point you have degradation failure. So we always understood that this was the wrong material for submersible hulls because with each pressure cycle you can have progressive damage. So it's quite insidious because you may have a number of successful dives, which is what happened here, and then have it fail later.
The problem here though is that if you have an issue with a phone, it's not life or death. Elon Musk's spacecrafts, up until they had been tested to death, flew unmanned. There was no risk really of loss of life. In this case though, there were people going on board these ships. And it seemed many people beforehand had questioned deeply the way that Stockton was going about fulfilling this vision. And this sub had foregone being certified by an outside company.
OceanGate was previously warned about safety concerns. As you are an owner of an underwater exploration company, what is your reaction to that? They were given warnings and they said, we're going ahead, we're adventurers.
I have a lot of questions myself. I appreciate the exploration ethos. You want to go out and explore, you want to take a risk, you want to do that.
At what cost?
Exactly. And so you have to ask other questions.
All right, so this is the Iron Sub, and almost every component the sub has on it, whether it's the batteries, like these big orange batteries, these pods right here, these glass spheres that can have a lot of the controls for the thrusters, even the drop weights, like this big tray under here. We can test everything on this big fixture, make sure it works right, make changes, and then take that stuff and go put it on the sub. So we don't have to test it, on the sub itself. We can test it ahead of time.
Subs that carry passengers can go through independent safety assessments by specialist organisations, but the Titan was not certified by any external agency. In a blog post in 2019, the company said its design fell outside the accepted system, and that simply focusing on classing the vessel does not address the operational risks. So is this unusual?
All right, so this is Titan, OceanGate's deepest diving sub. It is really unique because unlike the other subs we have, this one's made of carbon fiber and titanium. On the back here, this back dome, just like our front dome, which will go in our front door, is titanium. It's 3 1/4 inch thick titanium. It weighs like 3,700 pounds. And it's attached to the middle section, like this paper towel tube. It's made of 5-inch thick carbon fiber. So we have titanium, carbon fiber, and titanium, which makes it super, super strong. And it can dive to 4,000 meters, which is deeper than the Titanic is, so we can go explore it.
Any sub that dives 4,000 meters or beyond is a one-off vehicle, but it doesn't mean it can't be independently classified. This sub, called the Limited Factor, has repeatedly been to the deepest place in the oceans, the Mariana Trench, nearly 11 kilometers down. Nothing is more unique or cutting edge, but the team behind it worked with assessors, and the Limiting Factor has full certification.
We add some weight on these legs. We have drop weights that go in here, in this tray. And of course we put 5 people in that, so it adds a little bit of weight too. And we make it super heavy, well not super heavy, but heavy enough to go down to the seafloor. When we get down there, we drop a couple of the weights, and then we become neutrally buoyant. So we just kind of float. We don't float up and we don't sink down. And then we can use our thrusters, these big electric thrusters, to cruise around the wreck and explore.
But I'm sure in the future there will be Coast Guard standards that will say, you know, you're not going because you don't meet a standard. And that's what we need now. We can't have people just making up their own, well, we're going to break the rules and go. And again, it's hard at this point to blame the victims or the survivors. But in retrospect, this was a volunteer mission, but it's a volunteer mission that has captured the nation and put a lot of pressure on the Coast Guard to do something that, if they had a right to say so, this probably wouldn't have gone.
OceanGate's new approach to manned submersibles is based upon new lightweight materials,
A carbon fiber hull,
existing off-the-shelf technologies,
commercial game controllers, standard computers.
and operational efficiency.
And one of the things we've done is automate a lot of the internal functions. It is a very simple vehicle to train someone to operate. If you look back at the earlier designs of deep diving submersibles, they weren't focused on market opportunities, and that led to designs that were large, bulky, expensive.
Test dives in Puget Sound are conducted with the assistance of OceanGate's partner, the Applied Physics Laboratory at the University of Washington.
We can scale to multiple vehicles relatively quickly because we've used commercially off-the-shelf products for almost everything we do. We can bring additional vessels online in a matter of months as opposed to years or decades.
I did know because I was originally supposed to go out in 2019 when they thought the pressure test would be finished and Titan would be able to take out passengers in 2019. And there were some sort of problems with weather in the Bahamas where they were testing it and other things. I think then the Titan was tested and found that maybe it had to be reinforced some more, which I think was done during 2020. I don't know all the details in that.
Lloyd's Registrar, and that is the company that typically does this type of marine vessel registration, denied the request to do that. Did not want to work with them. The company did not provide a reason as to why that happened. But what's interesting about that, you'll remember that OceanGate on its website had said that they had decided to forego getting registered, saying that it was standing in the way of innovation. That was something that was up on their website. That website has now been taken down.
As far back as 2018, concerns had been raised about the sub by a number of people, especially about the carbon fiber tub. Allegedly, the craft in 2018, 2019 and 2020 had also failed pressure tests and therefore had to be reinforced. But if that wasn't enough, engineers within the company itself were beginning to raise concerns, and not just internally, outside of the company as well in terms of lawsuits.
In 2018, safety issues were raised by an employee of OceanGate, David Lockridge, an experienced submersible pilot.
CNN has learned that years ago, 2 employees raised safety concerns about the now missing OceanGate submarine.
An industry group also jumped in, and there was a letter that was found by the New York Times from them in which they said about what was happening at OceanGate. Our apprehension is that the current experimental approach adopted by OceanGate in developing this craft could result in negative outcomes from minor to catastrophic.
NBC News has reviewed a legal document, a settlement from 2018, a lawsuit in which one member of the company sued the company, claiming that they had not certified this craft to dive to the depths that they were promising to go to.
In American court documents, he said the structural integrity of the Titan had not been properly tested, and this could subject passengers to potential extreme danger in an experimental submersible.
He focused his criticisms on the company's decision to rely on acoustic monitoring the sounds the hull made under pressure as opposed to a scan of the hull.
It's a bit like saying we have a bit of a poor design for the engine in our jet or our rocket ship, but we have a sensor that will tell us if it's on fire. If you're building a hull where you need to have sensors to tell you that it's failing, in the process of failing, you have no business designing subs or being in that sub.
Yep, she's doing great. It's been a very pleasant surprise. When you put a sub in, you don't know if she's going to handle as well. You aren't certain if you're going to have systems have failures, but she's been a great machine.
Cyclops is the newest creation of OceanGate, a for-profit private company in partnership with the University of Washington's Applied Physics Laboratory.
We couldn't have done it without that partnership. You know, the Applied Physics Lab has been effectively our engineering partner.
There's aspects of it that are groundbreaking.
David Dyer tackled the impact of hull design on efficient energy use, developing an evolution from earlier, boxier OceanGate submersibles.
When you look at the Cyclops shape, there was a lot of effort put into it to make it look neat and cool, but also to make it so that it was functionally hydrodynamically efficient.
Efficient without compromising the pressure hull.
We are now taking a pretty significant exoskeleton structure, having to attach it to the primary pressure hull.
That's good. Come on in. I think we can push it over.
You can't put holes in it. We didn't want to weld to it. We had to do it in such a way that we didn't impact the functionality of that pressure hull. So technically, that was a big challenge for us.
This is an experimental sub. People are informed that it's very dangerous down there.
Last year, he showed CBS how the vessel was operated via a games console. Questions are being asked about the potential safety problems of the submersible. Court documents from 2018 reveal a former worker of OceanGate raised concerns.
However, during the search in 2023, there was really one part of the development of this craft that captured the attention of the public more than any other, and it involved a video game controller.
What did you get to do on the dive today?
I got to pilot, which was fantastic.
Combination steering wheel and gas pedal, which is this device. This is a Sony PlayStation PS3 gaming controller. And with this device, we can drive the submarine. In a nutshell, the electrons from here have to make it through about 10 different channels of a computer, out fiber optic, into another device, which turns it into an analog signal, out to a motor drive, which then generates high-power electrical signals out to the thrusters.
This is how we drive the sub. So this is a Logitech video game controller. So if you can play a video game, you can pretty much drive the sub. So the thrusters on the outside, there's 4 thrusters, 2 horizontal and 2 vertical. And we use these controls and the cameras and the screens here to be able to drive the sub and just fly it around underwater.
Another part of this coverage that took up the majority of the attention online specifically about the hunt for the Titan was the disparity between the wealthy and the less wealthy. The fact that a lot of people didn't have any sympathy for the 5 souls on board because they were rich people who paid $250,000 to go on such a dramatic and, well, let's be honest, a dangerous adventure. People who paid that money and also signed a waiver to say that they couldn't sue the company or their families couldn't sue the company if they were to pass on the trip. And there was also the outrage at the inequality of coverage, as there was wall-to-wall coverage around the submersible, but very little coverage around a migrant ship that was sinking off the coast of Greece.
The company had no plans to have the craft formally certified by the agency.
Oh, God, people are gross. Money. It's always money.
CNN, Fox covered the story the same way. And here's why, from a raw news editorial standpoint. The Greek migrants that drowned, there was no Titanic angle. Number one, huge angle. Number two, we had guests that knew people that were submerged. Number three, there was suspense because we had the countdown to the air shutting down. And This was off our coast. This is not Greece. This is the United States of America.
So it's a false comparison. In this case, you have one story of huge-scale tragedy in Greece, and you have another that is more intriguing because it's a sub that goes underwater, which they do.
Right. When I heard about the submarine people, the first thing I said was, what kind of stupid, Yeah. But I forget, I got empathy for the people still.
I do too.
They're dumb as fuck, but being trapped in a box is one of the worst ways to go.
Obscene inequality, 24-hour coverage. And I understand it, of this submarine. At the same time, right here, just off the coast of Greece, we had 700 people dead. It's not dominating in the same way. And in some ways, it's indicative of the degree to which people's life chances have grown so disparate.
Suppose this is a one-off. It's something slightly unique. Sadly, migrant boats capsizing in the Mediterranean is almost a daily occurrence. The incident last week off Greece was particularly horrific, but there have been other incidents where people have lost their lives since.
As all of this outrage and discourse took place, though, the oxygen began to tick down and the search widened. It became more and more monumental of a search for a needle in a haystack as every hour passed.
In terms of, so we talked about the oxygen number. I think you're all tracking the oxygen number. I think there's an important point with that, though. The oxygen, that's just one piece of data, right? There are a lot of pieces of data that we need to consider.
Right now, there are 5 people on board a vessel bound for the wreckage of the Titanic, and they are trapped inside a space that is just the size of a minivan, with only 31 hours of air left to breathe.
I'm less concerned about the pressure because the cabin is supposed to be pressurized, and if they've lost pressure, that will have been a catastrophic event. But the biggest concerns down there are going to be hypothermia and how long their oxygen supply will last.
A final thought, because they still obviously have to find this vessel, but if they do in the coming hours, and if it's brought to the surface quickly, what are the dangers there?
I am less concerned about decompression from them being in a submarine than I am about hypothermia, hypoxia, dehydration, and also when you're laying still for a long period of time, you're at risk of blood clots.
Then, with less than a day's oxygen remaining, there was finally a glimmer of hope for the families of the 5 souls on board.
And they haven't found them yet, but they're hearing banging now.
Yeah, and
what does that mean? I mean, they have 30 hours, less than 30 hours now.
Probably the best news that I've heard through the beginning of this whole ordeal. The sounds banging, possible banging on the sub would be the first and best noises we could get to be able to locate the sub.
Good morning. This was a Canadian P-3 surveillance plane. It was flying over the area. It dropped a sonar buoy, and that buoy, it says, picked up some noises, some banging, some tapping in the water.
A glimmer of hope this morning in the desperate search for that private sub in the North Atlantic. And overnight, multiple reports suggest banging was heard at 30-minute intervals. That according to an internal government update on the search. 4 hours later, banging was still heard, the memo said, and it was unclear if those were the same noises detected by the sonar buoys.
Jim, I think I would agree with the Coast Guard captain that says that they don't exactly know what they have.
In the last 2 hours, the US Coast Guard's confirmed that a Canadian aircraft detected underwater noises.
You know, Tom, as we've mentioned before in the last couple of days, this submersible was designed so that if it got into trouble, it was supposed to automatically float back to the surface. We don't know why that hasn't happened.
Acoustics in the big open ocean is very hard to say.
That it is standard submariners practice to bang on the hull at the top of the hour, at a half hour, perhaps for 3 minutes. So were the noises that were detected, was that a one-off, or was there any sort of pattern detected?
So we're working very closely with leading acoustics experts, both here in the U.S. Navy and the Canadian Navy. And I've integrated a UK submariner into my command here in Boston, thanks to the support from the UK Consul General here in Boston, Dr. Abbott.
But you say plural, signatures, right? Signatures. You heard something more than once?
So the sonar buoys pick up a number of noise, and so we're looking at all of the information that's come in through the sonar buoys.
Right, but it was well, it was sufficiently interesting, put it that way, for you to say, right, we need to narrow a search over here.
This is a really complex search and rescue case.
I don't know, and John, I'd hate to speculate on information that I don't have all the data on and all the facts on.
So a couple things. One, I think when you're in the middle of a search and rescue case, you always have hope. That's why we're doing what we do. With respect to the noises specifically, we don't know what they are, to be frank with you. The P3 detected noises. That's why they're up there. That's why they're doing what they're doing. That's why they put sonar buoys in the water. The good news is, what I can tell you is we're searching in the area where the noises were detected, and we'll continue to do so. And we hope that when we're able to get additional ROVs, which will be there in the morning, the intent will be to continue to search in those areas where the noises were detected, and if they're continuing to be detected, and then put additional ROVs down in the last known position where the search was originally taking place.
The banging sounds are interesting because knowing P.H. Nargeolet and his experience with submersibles and his background in submarines, this is exactly how he would try to indicate that they were still alive and try to communicate with the surface. He would do some banging. You would do it on a regular schedule so that it was distinguishable from the background noises that are in the ocean all the time.
If P.H. Nargeolet was sitting here with me like he normally would be, this is what he would say to do. Let's just sit down together in a small room, figure out what needs to be done, and let's make it happen. Let's do it.
As the estimated oxygen on board finally ticked down to 0, there was still no lead on the location of the submersible.
Yeah, so the Coast Guard as well really seemed to be offering a bit of a grace period beyond the 96 hours that the company had published that this sub could sustain life for 5 people. In that they said that they wouldn't be immediately switching to a recovery operation upon that 36 hours.
6 hours after that 0 mark on the oxygen estimations had passed, the search continued. There was still hope. P.H. Nargeolet was on board, and he was an experienced diver and a man who should have been able to keep them calm enough to extend the oxygen out if needs be. But then that all changed.
I want to get to CNN's Paula Newton, who has confirmation of these new details. Paula, we understand that there is confirmation now from the U.S. Coast Guard that portions of the external body of the Titan have been discovered roughly 500 meters off the bow of the Titanic.
We don't want to make any assumptions here, Brent, but I assume, given the amount of debris that there is in the ocean floor related to the Titanic itself, that the U.S. Coast Guard would not have put out a tweet saying that it had found a debris field and scheduled a briefing, unless they had something that really connected this.
And there is the tweet right there. It says 1 of 2. I wonder if we have the next one.
The assessment from individuals at OceanGate that I've been chatting with today indicated that if it was from their vessel, that it indicated a catastrophic failure.
From what we understand, this is a debris field that has been found on the seabed, and this is this submersible that managed to get there today after 4 days of searching.
Yeah, that's right. And we had news earlier that a debris field had been found, but now, at that point it could have been the wreckage site around the Titanic. That's very large, but it does seem to be some confirmation of the object.
So a significant line, clearly a holding position as they look to find out what exactly this debris is, but
that it was a landing frame and a rear cover from the submersible that's been discovered.
They are surmising that because of the wreckage that they have found, that the capsule itself would not have survived, that it must have been a catastrophic failure at the moment of the event.
Along with the confirmation that debris from the submersible itself had been found, and that therefore likely the worst outcome was what had taken place, we also started to get news, rumors, and almost confirmations that there was trouble on the ship and that the ship had actually tried to ascend around an hour and 45 minutes into the dive, and apparently had been relaying issues back to the Polar Prince up top.
I was also told, and I don't have confirmation on this, that they were on descent, they were a couple hundred meters above the seafloor, and they dropped their weights. Now, the only way for the ship to know that they had dropped their ascent weights, which would be an emergency abort, is if they had called that in, that they were ascending. So I believe now that they had some warning, that they heard some acoustic signature of the hull beginning to delaminate.
Clear for descent. Enjoy the ride.
Descending now. Launch sequence complete. Ready?
All clear.
Proceeding.
Enjoy the dive, gentlemen. We're 15 minutes into the dive. Current depth systems check, please.
Systems check complete. All in order. All lights are green. We are 756.
Thank you. Proceed. 30 minutes in. Update, please.
All systems are functioning normally. We're in good shape. Continuing our descent as planned.
Superb. Proceed. Over 45-minute mark. Current depth. Confirm status.
Depth at 1934. All systems stable and descent continuing as planned. Happy crew.
Excellent. You're at the hour mark.
All is smooth sailing here.
You're at 75 minutes. Depth status. Do you need to adjust velocity?
All under control. At 2960. No adjustments needed. We're enjoying the ride.
Understood.
We're noting an alarm from the RTM. Reducing velocity. Descent depth 3,433.
Understood. Do you need to ascend?
No change with thrust. The rate of descent is increasing. At 35. Going to release the ballast now.
Yes, agree. Release the ballast.
No improvement. Preparing to jettison the frame.
Affirmative. Update when able. RTM indicator status.
Frame jettisoned. Multiple attempts needed. But starting the ascent now.
Multiple attempts. What is your status? RTM indicator depth. Update, please, when able. Can you identify source? RTM indicator status.
Negative.
RTM status.
Trying to run diagnostics. Ascending now, but very slow. Sounds have subsided. Global RTM alert active all red.
Any codes, depth, ascent rate? Updates when able, please.
Slow ascent in progress. Quarter predicted. Unclear why rate is small. No indicator. At 3,476.
We are talking it over with the engineer. Stand by. Depth and status, please. What's the wattage on upwards thrust?
Reading red on the A power bus. I switched to B. At 3,457 and more sounds aft.
Understood. Continue ascent. Talking to Carlos about power bus situation right now. Stand by. We are activating recovery procedures. Carlos is requesting wattage output from bus B status. Update, please. Velocity of ascent. We're not receiving you. Update, please. Status and depth report. We need you to respond with status and depth. Carlos is requesting wattage update on thrusters. We're unable to read you. We are moving to recovery coordinates. Report if you please respond if you're able.
The US Navy has said it detected sounds consistent with an implosion shortly after the sub lost contact. Search teams found debris from the sub thousands of meters below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean.
In consultation
with experts from within the Unified Command, the debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Upon this determination, we immediately notified the families.
Well, it's the worst possible outcome. All 5 men not being able to come home. Frankly, it's what I feared when I got the first call on Monday about what had happened.
I want to concentrate for just a second because we have their pictures up. And as we wrap up our coverage here and go on to outnumber the human element in all of this, and the 5 souls that are aboard the submersible Titan.
The family of the British explorer Hamish Harding said he was a loving husband, a dedicated father and a legend who lived for his next adventure. And relatives of the Surrey businessman Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son Suleiman described their unimaginable loss.
I had a sense that this was not okay, and he was not very comfortable about doing it. To know that my Sully didn't feel a moment's pain, that his brain didn't even realize, that's a relief.
Kristen, he didn't want to go. He was just trying to please his dad.
I think generally innovation and exploration should be commended. It's part of what makes us human, pushing boundaries. Every year, thousands of people summit Everest for no other reason than to achieve it, to make it something that they can tick off a list in their life. People jump out of planes. We take enormous risks in our day-to-day lives. 1.3 million people last year died in cars for the sake of convenience in reality, for making journeys shorter. And people like Stockton Rush are needed in our world. They are the few people who push us forward in progress. The people who are willing to take the risk to make their vision a reality, whether that be to create the television, or to fly the first plane, or to open up the deep sea for the world to know more about. But innovation in such a dangerous situation, in such an unknown with new composites, going to places that are so dangerous in terms of pressure, should be contained to those who are trying to push the boundaries. Even with all of the warnings, he pushed on as if it was a solo mission, taking people other than himself and even those working on it out into a craft that in reality was still very much experimental. I think if Stockton himself, and perhaps maybe some of the engineers from OceanGate, had have been the ones lost on this voyage, I think even I would have commended their willingness to push boundaries and to try something new, and I would have raised a glass and saluted an explorer, an innovator. Like I said, people that we should be very much looking up to as people who progress society. The issue arises from taking outside passengers. Did these people accept that risk? Sure. But I would argue 1.3 million people who died in cars last year accepted that risk when they got into the car. But there's a stark difference. The difference here is the lack of testing and certification, the unknown risk. When you get in a car, you at the very least know that there are seat belts, there are safety devices that have been tested, and have been tested a lot. If this craft likewise had been tested to within at least the certifications that other similar craft had taken, then you could say, well, at the very least, there was an acceptable level of risk that these people knew about. It wasn't a level of risk that they accepted, but was very much unknown. So while I think I commend innovation and exploration in general, those passengers, in my opinion at least, should not have been aboard that ship. And the people who were on board that vessel, the people who died, were just that, people, victims. Their bank accounts in no way change that humanity. The simple fact that there are greater tragedies, greater issues, and greater difficulties in this world doesn't make this any less of a tragedy, especially for the families. At least in some small solace for the families. This one was literally instant. A moment that happened so fast, around 20 milliseconds, that they literally would have felt no pain, as it takes around 5 to 10 times that for pain to even be recognized by the brain. A moment in which the lives of 5 husbands, fathers, sons perished in the epitome of the human spirit of exploration and innovation, one that is more and more alien to us as we move to cities and get away from the wild and become more risk averse. And while that's a good thing, I don't think we should condemn those who are willing and excited to still take those risks, regardless of their status, regardless of their net worth.
I was waiting in the undertow, set adrift with featherweight like bones, unaware of where my heart would flow. I was waiting in the undertow, can't touch the bottom, sit into a tumble, waves that shake me out of my skin. Never been so easy, losing my direction. My bearings have me south of home, but I've been wrong before. I was waiting in the undertow, set adrift with featherweight like bones, unaware of where my heart would flow. I was waiting in the undertow. And the water like a friend I've not seen in years, so familiar and strange at once, like a lover who